Picture this. Your wedding night takes place in front of a dozen witnesses who will then write an official report about what happened. Sounds like a nightmare. For medieval monarchs, this was completely normal. We're used to thinking that intimacy is a purely private matter. But in medieval royal palaces, the private lives of rulers became state theater. Every breath in a monarch's bedroom could determine the fate of a dynasty, and therefore, entire nations. Today, when we live in an era of total privacy and personal data protection, it seems incredible that once the most intimate moments of rulers became subjects of public discussion. However, it was precisely this transparency of the royal bedchamber that shaped Europe's political map for centuries. Forget romantic movies about medieval castles. Reality was far more shocking, pragmatic, and at the same time surprisingly logical. When succession to the throne is at stake, and with it peace or war between kingdoms, even the most intimate details become instruments of grand politics. Medieval chronicles are full of descriptions that would shock modern readers with their frankness. A monk from the Abbey of Saint-Denis describes in detail how French King Philip Augustus fulfilled his marital duty on his first wedding night. English chroniclers recorded every attempt at conceiving an heir by Henry VIII. Spanish courtiers kept detailed records of how many times per week their Catholic majesties honored each other with royal attention. This wasn't a manifestation of medieval voyeurism. It was harsh political necessity. In a world where the legitimacy of power was determined by divine right and blood kinship, every potential heir had to be born before the maximum possible number of witnesses. Doubts about a prince's parentage could cost the entire dynasty their throne and their lives. Paradoxically, it was precisely the publicity of monarchs' intimate lives that made their power more stable. When subjects knew their ruler was capable of producing a legitimate heir, this guaranteed a peaceful transition of power. And that meant sparing the country from civil wars over the throne. The royal bedchamber became a theater where dramas of state importance were played out. Here political alliances were made and dissolved. Future monarchs were born, and sometimes conspiracies against current rulers were hatched. Intimacy became diplomacy, and diplomacy became a very specific form of intimacy. Contemporaries perfectly understood this logic. No one was outraged by interference in private life because a monarch simply had no private life. The crown made every aspect of human existence public property. In exchange for absolute power, the ruler gave up absolute transparency of their own life. This system gave birth to practices that seem amazing by modern standards. Special court positions ranging from keeper of the royal bed to witness of marital duties. Elaborately developed rituals for blessing the marriage bed, medical examinations of queens for virginity and ability to bear children, official reports on every act of intimacy between royal spouses. All this seems like wild anachronism to us. But medieval people saw this as a manifestation of the highest wisdom. When a kingdom's fate depends on a ruler's ability to produce an heir, controlling this process becomes a matter of national security. Imagine a room full of tense faces in expensive clothes. They all stare intently at a huge canopied bed where the most important act in the kingdom's history has just concluded. Welcome to a royal wedding night, an event that was more public than a modern wedding ceremony. The ritual of blessing the bed began long before the newlyweds were alone. The entire court gathered in the royal bedchamber, where the bishop consecrated the marriage bed with holy water and pronounced special prayers. Then the bride was solemnly undressed by her ladies, and the groom by his courtiers. Every piece of clothing was folded according to strict protocol. But the most shocking part began afterward. The witnesses didn't leave the room. They stayed to witness the consummation of marriage. This wasn't perverted voyeurism. It was state necessity. An unconsummated marriage could be annulled by the church, meaning the political alliance between kingdoms would be threatened. English King Henry VII personally attended the marriage of his son Prince Arthur to Catherine of Aragon in 1481. Chronicles preserved the names of 12 witnesses who confirmed proper fulfillment of marital duty. When Prince Arthur died and Catherine claimed her virginal state, these testimonies became the basis for a long dispute about the legitimacy of her subsequent marriage to Henry VIII. The French court took publicity to absurd lengths. Under Louis XI, there was a position of observer of the royal bed, a person who officially recorded every attempt to conceive an heir. His reports were filed with state documents and stored in the Royal Archive. Modern historians have the most detailed statistics of French monarchs' intimate lives, thanks to these meticulously kept records. German electors went even further. They demanded the presence of representatives from all interested parties at every dynastically significant event. When, in 1397, Rupert of the Palatinate married Elizabeth of Nuremberg, their bedroom contained ambassadors from 7 electorates, 3 bishops, and a notary who compiled a detailed protocol of the proceedings. Most shocking was the custom of demonstrating evidence. Bloodied sheets were displayed for all to see as proof of the bride's virginity and successful completion of marriage. These relics were sometimes even sent to the bride's parents as official confirmation of the accomplished union. The Spanish court added a medical component to this ritual. The royal physician had to examine the newlyweds before and after the wedding night, composing a detailed conclusion about their physical condition. These documents also became part of the state archive and could be used in future dynastic disputes. Interestingly, the participants in these rituals perceived what was happening as a completely normal part of royal duties. Empress Anna of Austria of the Holy Roman Empire wrote in a letter to her mother, "Fulfilling marital duty in the presence of witnesses is no stranger than coronation in the presence of subjects. Both are necessary ceremonies of power." Even repeated marriages of kings were accompanied by similar rituals. Henry VIII insisted on the presence of witnesses at each of his 6 weddings. Marriages to Anne Boleyn and Anne of Cleves were especially carefully monitored. In the first case, to confirm the legitimacy of the secret ceremony. In the second, to record grounds for future annulment. French Queen Marie de Medici left in her memoirs a detailed description of her wedding night with Henry IV. She lists by name all the witnesses present and notes that the king fulfilled his duty 3 times, to the great pleasure of the kingdom. Such frankness in official documents was absolutely normal for that time. The church not only didn't condemn such practices, but actively supported them. Marriage was viewed as a sacrament, and its completion as a godly deed that should be performed openly, without secrecy and shame. Papal bulls directly prescribed the presence of clergy at the marriages of royal persons. Courtly love isn't what you think it is. Forget romantic ballads about knights praising unattainable ladies. In reality, this was a sophisticated system of codified adultery, where passion served political interests and poetry masked the most cynical intrigues. Andreas Capellanus, author of the 12th century treatise The Art of Courtly Love, formulated 31 rules of courtly love. But behind elegant formulations lay shocking reality. True love between spouses was declared impossible. Marriage was viewed as a business deal, and real feelings could exist only outside its framework. Eleanor of Aquitaine transformed her court into a true academy of extramarital passions. Here, rules of noble adultery were developed, where every gesture, every word had a strictly defined meaning. The queen personally presided over courts of love, where disputes between lovers were resolved and norms of behavior for adultery were established. Most surprising was that husbands not only knew about their wives' love affairs, but often encouraged them. The Count of Champagne was proud that his wife Marie inspired troubadours to create love songs. He even allocated special chambers for her meetings with poets, considering this a sign of his house's high status. But courtly love had a dark side too. Behind romantic rituals lay cruel political calculations. King Philip Augustus of France used his courtiers' love affairs as instruments of blackmail and control. He encouraged adultery, then threatened to expose it, forcing the nobility into submission. The English court during Richard the Lionheart's time turned courtly love into a real industry. Special arrangers of meetings organized secret encounters between noble lovers, charging considerable fees for this. Income from this business filled the royal treasury, and the information obtained was used for political pressure. Surprisingly, women possessed significant power in this system. Queen Isabella of Bavaria of France openly maintained 7 favorites simultaneously, each representing the interests of a particular political faction. Through intimate relationships She managed court intrigues and influenced state policy. The church officially condemned courtly love, but in practice often turned a blind eye to what was happening. Moreover, many high-ranking clerics participated in these games themselves. Cardinal Pierre de Luna maintained a luxurious palace in Avignon where poetic tournaments were held, a sophisticated form of group adultery disguised as literary competitions. The German court developed a special form of courtly love called Minnesang. This was a strictly regulated system of relationships, where every stage from acquaintance to physical intimacy followed detailed rules. Special positions of keepers of love secrets existed to monitor etiquette compliance and prevent scandals. Spanish monarchs took the hypocrisy of courtly love to absurd lengths. They publicly proclaimed fidelity to Catholic values and the sanctity of marriage. But their courts swarmed with mistresses and lovers. King Henry IV of Castile officially had 14 favorites, each receiving title and support from the state treasury. Most cynical was the institution of ladies of the heart, officially recognized mistresses of crowned persons. These women received titles, lands, and political influence in exchange for intimate services. Their children became acknowledged bastards with rights to support and sometimes inheritance. French Mademoiselle de la Vallière, favorite of Louis XIV, left shocking memoirs about court life. She describes how the king personally compiled schedules for meetings with his mistresses, considering the political significance of each. His Majesty loved not with his heart, but with his head, she wrote. Italian city-states created real passion exchanges where love affairs of nobility were bought and sold. Venetian courtesans received education equal to men and spoke several languages to serve foreign diplomats. Their services were part of diplomatic protocol, but most striking were the double standards for men and women. A king could have as many mistresses as he wanted, and this was considered a sign of his masculinity. But a queen's adultery was punished by death as high treason. Anne Boleyn was executed precisely on charges of adultery, although no evidence of her guilt was ever found. The royal physician enters the bedchamber with a bag full of strange instruments and vials of smoking liquids. His task isn't to treat diseases, but to ensure the kingdom's dynastic future. Welcome to the world of medieval medicine, where the intimate lives of monarchs became the subject of the most sophisticated experiments. Physicians at royal courts weren't just healers. They functioned as intimate consultants, witnesses, and even active participants in the marital relations of royal persons. Their presence in the bedroom was considered as necessary as a priest's presence in the chapel. Albertus Magnus, personal physician to Emperor Frederick II, created a detailed guide to medical accompaniment of royal intimacy. It contained recommendations for optimal positions for conceiving male heirs, diet for increasing fertility, and even astrological calculations of the most favorable days for marital intimacy. French kings took medical intervention in intimate life to absurd lengths. At the court of Louis IX, there was a position of observer of royal seed, a doctor who had to evaluate the quality and quantity of the monarch's seminal fluid. His reports became the basis for adjusting the royal diet and daily routine. Most shocking was the use of aphrodisiacs and stimulating substances. Spanish alchemists created special elixirs for their kings based on ground rhinoceros horn, crushed pearls, and extracts of rare plants. The cost of one portion of such a love potion equaled the annual salary of an ordinary courtier. English King Edward III regularly took a mixture of mandrake, ginseng, and powdered gold, which his physicians believed would ensure his ability to conceive heirs into old age. Chronicles preserved the recipe for this concoction. Take a mandrake root the size of a child's palm, grind with ginseng leaves, and add gold powder on the tip of a knife. German electors practiced even stranger methods. They kept special fertility tasters at court, people who tried various potions on themselves before offering them to the ruler. These volunteers received generous compensation, but many died from poisoning by exotic components. Female fertility was controlled even more strictly. Royal wives were regularly examined not only externally, but internally. Special instruments existed for examining the royal womb, primitive analogs of modern gynecological devices made from silver and ivory. Italian physicians of the Renaissance created an entire science of royal fertility. They developed complex nutrition schemes for pregnant queens, including strictly defined food combinations for each day of pregnancy. Violating this diet was punished by banishment of court cooks. Most bizarre was the practice of seed baths. French queens took baths in water infused with herbs that physicians believed promoted conception. Seeds of various plants were added to the water, hence the name of the procedure. Marie de Medici spent several hours daily in such baths. Control over queens' menstrual cycles was conducted with the precision of astronomical observations. Special court ladies kept detailed records of regularity, duration, and intensity of monthly bleeding. This information was used by physicians to compose optimal schedules for marital duties. Portuguese monarchs practiced urine diagnosis. Physicians daily examined the urine of the royal couple, determining fertility ability by its color, smell, and consistency. Special silver vessels even existed for collecting and storing these samples. Hungarian kings trusted not only physicians, but astrologers. Detailed compatibility horoscopes of spouses were compiled, most favorable days for conception determined, and even optimal positions based on star positions. Queen Maria of Anjou of Hungary had a personal astrologer who was present in the bedroom during marital intimacy. Most shocking was the application of surgical methods. At some courts, circumcision of adult kings was practiced to improve seminal properties. This painful procedure was performed without anesthesia and often led to serious complications. Polish kings used the services of virginity checkers, specially trained women who had to confirm the chastity of royal brides. This humiliating procedure was conducted publicly, in the presence of representatives from both dynasties. 1536. The Tower of London. Anne Boleyn walks to the scaffold, accused of treason against King Henry VIII. But her true crime isn't that she allegedly betrayed her husband. Her guilt is that she couldn't bear a son. Welcome to a world where royal passion could cost not only the throne, but one's head. History is full of scandals when monarchs' intimate secrets exploded Europe's political map. Each of these cases shows how closely personal passions and state interests were intertwined in medieval kingdoms. The loudest scandal of the 14th century was the case of French King Philip the Fair's daughters-in-law. In 1313, it was discovered that 2 of 3 princesses were cheating on their husbands with court knights. The third knew about the affairs, but remained silent. The scandal was called the Tour de Nesle affair, after the location of secret meetings. The consequences were catastrophic. Margaret of Burgundy and Blanche of Burgundy were forced to become nuns after public repentance. Their lovers, brothers Gautier and Philip d'Aunay, were subjected to sophisticated torture and then executed. But the worst began afterward. The dynastic crisis led to the beginning of the 100 Years' War between France and England. English King Edward II turned his passion for favorite Piers Gaveston into a state catastrophe. Their relationship was so open, it shocked even barons accustomed to court intrigues. The king showered his lover with titles, lands, and riches while ignoring state affairs and his own wife. Isabella of France, Edward's wife, couldn't endure the humiliation. She fled to France, where she became the mistress of exile Roger Mortimer. Together, they organized an invasion of England. Edward II was overthrown and killed in Berkeley Castle in a manner chroniclers describe as befitting his vices. Spanish King Henry IV of Castile earned the nickname the Impotent for good reason. His inability to continue the lineage became a source of endless palace intrigues. When Queen Joanna of Portugal finally became pregnant, the entire country discussed who the child's true father was. Henry's daughter, Princess Joanna, was nicknamed La Beltraneja after her supposed father, courtier Beltran de la Cueva. This scandal split Castile into 2 camps and led to civil war that ended only with the ascension of Isabella the Catholic. French King Louis XI used sexual scandals as weapons against his opponents. He created a network of informants who gathered compromising material on noble families. Information about extramarital affairs, illegitimate children, and secret marriages became instruments of political blackmail. Most cynical was the case of Duke Charles the Bold of Burgundy. Louis spread rumors that the Duke was impotent, and his daughter Mary was a bastard of unknown origin. These gossips undermined Charles's authority among allies and weakened his positions in war against the French king. Italian city-states turned sexual intrigue into art. The Borgia family reached unprecedented heights in this matter. Cesare Borgia seduced the wives of his political opponents, then used the information obtained to destroy them. His sister Lucrezia Borgia married 3 times, and each marriage ended with her husband's mysterious death. Pope Alexander VI, father of Lucrezia and Cesare, turned the Vatican into a real brothel. He openly lived with several mistresses simultaneously and acknowledged his illegitimate children. Contemporaries wrote that papal chambers resembled a Turkish sultan's harem more than the residence of the head of the Christian world. German Emperor Sigismund faced scandal when it was discovered that his wife, Barbara of Chile, was secretly meeting with Hungarian magnate Ulrich of Chile, her own nephew. This incest was especially shocking even by medieval standards. The emperor was forced to publicly forgive his wife to avoid political crisis. Polish King Sigismund Augustus married Barbara Radziwill against the will of the Sejm and Catholic Church. Their secret marriage nearly led to civil war. When Barbara suddenly died, rumors of poisoning spread. The king never recovered from this loss and died childless, leading to the extinction of the Jagiellonian dynasty. Hungarian Queen Elizabeth of Luxembourg ordered the murder of King Charles Robert of Anjou in revenge for her husband's death. She lured him to the castle under the pretext of marriage negotiations, then personally stabbed him with a dagger. This act of bloody revenge led to a 20-year war between Hungary and Naples. Today, members of the British royal family strictly guard their private lives, and any hints at intimate details cause scandals in the press. But just a few centuries ago, their ancestors lived in a world where privacy was a luxury unavailable even to the most powerful monarchs. What has changed since then, and what lessons can we draw from this shocking history? The first and most important change is the emergence of the concept of a private life. In the medieval world, such a notion simply didn't exist. The king belonged not to himself, but to the state, and every aspect of his existence was considered public property. The modern idea of the right to privacy formed only in the Enlightenment era, when philosophers began distinguishing between public and private spheres of human life. The second cardinal change concerned religion's role. The medieval church viewed marriage as a sacrament that should be performed openly, without shame or concealment. Modern religious denominations, conversely, emphasize intimacy and the sacred secret of marital relations. This turn occurred during the Reformation, when Protestants revised Catholic concepts of marriage. The third change relates to medicine. Medieval physicians considered it normal to be present during patients' most intimate moments. Modern medical ethics, conversely, is built on principles of confidentiality and patient consent. The turning point was the development of scientific medicine in the 17th and 18th centuries. But most striking is that many medieval practices have modern analogs. The publicity of royal marriages hasn't disappeared. It simply took other forms. The wedding of Prince Charles and Princess Diana in 1981 was broadcast to 750 million televisions worldwide. This is no less public than medieval marriage rituals. Control over monarchs' reproductive function has also survived, albeit in veiled form. Modern royal families carefully plan the birth of heirs, considering public opinion and political situation. The pregnancy of the Duchess of Cambridge is covered in the press no less thoroughly than pregnancies of medieval queens. Sexual scandals are still capable of shaking monarchies' foundations. The abdication of King Edward VIII in 1936, due to his romance with divorced American Wallis Simpson, showed that monarchs' intimate lives can still influence politics. The story of Princess Margaret, who couldn't marry a divorced man, repeats medieval plots about love and duty. Modern media play the role of medieval court chroniclers. They watch monarchs' personal lives just as closely, seek compromising facts, and turn private moments into public spectacles. Paparazzi are modern observers of the royal bed. Regarding myths about medieval sexual practices, most don't correspond to reality. Myth 1. Medieval people were sexually repressed. Actually, they approached intimacy much more openly than 19th century Victorians, who created this stereotype. Myth 2. Women in the Middle Ages had no sexual freedom. Reality was more complex. Aristocratic women often possessed significant sexual autonomy, especially widows and unmarried heiresses. Eleanor of Aquitaine or Christine de Pizange had more sexual freedom than many 19th century women. Myth 3. The Church completely suppressed sexuality. In practice, medieval clerics were often quite liberal regarding intimacy. Many priests lived in common law marriage, and high hierarchs openly kept mistresses. Myth 4. Medieval marriages were exclusively political deals without love. Although political considerations indeed played a major role, many sources testify to sincere attachment between spouses. Letters of Abelard and Heloise, or Henry II and Eleanor of Aquitaine, show deep feelings. The main lesson of medieval history of royal intimacy lies in understanding the inseparable connection between personal and political. In a world where power was inherited, a ruler's ability to continue the lineage became a matter of national security. This explains why such intimate questions became subjects of public control. Modern leaders should remember, in an era of social networks and digital surveillance, the boundary between private and public is blurring again. Perhaps we're returning to the medieval model where public figures simply have no right to complete privacy.